And now our host, Stephen Leigh Morris.
Welcome to Animal Farm, City Garage's weekly discussion of theater, politics, and pets. If you have a pet that you'd like to share with us, at least share a video with us, please send a link to animalfarm@citygarage.org. That's animalfarm, one word, @citygarage, one word.org. This week, Animal Farm goes to Warsaw, Poland, where we are joined by two young directors, who are already quite accomplished in Poland. Anna Smolar was actually born in France. She left France 16 years ago after having completed literature studies at Paris's Sorbonne University. She moved to Poland to establish herself as a theater director. Magda Szpecht is she studied in Wrocław. She was born in a town outside of Wrocław, in a mountain town near the Czech border. She studied literature and creative writing and journalism at Wrocław before moving to Krakow to study theater directing. At just about the same time that the United States was electing Donald Trump to the presidency, and the country was watching a drift towards authoritarianism and nationalism, Poland was going through much the same phenomenon with the election of President Duda to Poland. Magda and Anna discuss that drift, what it has meant for a young generation, and the impact it has had on the arts in Poland. Magda Szpecht and Anna Smolar, welcome to Animal Farm.
Hello.
Hi.
Are you both in Warsaw right now, or are you in different cities?
I'm in Warsaw.
I'm in Warsaw.
You're both in Warsaw.
Yes.
This is a show about theater, politics, and pets. And so we have two extremely politically engaged directors. They are already in their young careers, well established and accomplished in Poland. And I wanted to first ask you about the political situation in Poland and the drift towards authoritarianism under your president, Duda, and how that in general has affected the theater. And then we'll close in and talk more specifically about your own work. So I'll leave that open to either of you.
I think the first thing that happened in the world of culture is censorship. That started very quickly when the party Law and Justice won in 2015. And this was very clear that there is art that is okay and there is art that is not okay. And that if you're an artist or an institution that does not go into the values or the political, ideological vision of the party, then you're not really welcome to do your job or to be loud or to be invited in some structures.
I just want to jump in with a quick question for context. When you talk about censorship, that's a long established tradition in Eastern Europe. And are you talking about censorship under the communist regime or censorship under the current?
The current.
The current, very good. How is it different? Is it different from what it was like under the communists?
I think it's different, I suppose, although there are a lot of gestures of the actual government that really reminds a lot of what the communists were doing, like super controlling, the brutality of the police, the censorship. I suppose censorship is always censorship. It's just the values that are different, and the blackmailing that you're doing to put the public opinion against the artist. I suppose it's based on other values right now and other, political tools. And of course, here there is a lot of using the question of, Catholic values. I suppose, this is the main difference, which means very brutal anti-LGBT politics, anti-refugees, and anti-women's rights. And this is, I think, the main things that are very brutal and that are expressed in the censorship.
That's very clear. Magda?
In the last few years, we had few examples of censorship, which was more like economical censorship. And it means that if a festival would invite a show which is politically incorrect in terms of our government right now, the next year the festival will not get any money from public fundings. And we had like many cases like that. So I have a feeling that what changed in last 5 years or maybe a bit more is that we really have a problem with the freedom of speech right now, and it also and it's also in the art world.
That raises two questions. When you talk about a problem with freedom of speech, you were first talking about repression of political views. Is that correct? But here we have an issue where half the country, the two halves of the country, are living in alternate universes, and they can't even agree on what a fact is. There was so much, for instance, in the middle of our pandemic, particularly in the spring, there was so much politically motivated denial that the COVID virus even existed or was a danger, which parallels the denial that, for instance, climate change is even a problem. And I'm wondering, when you talk about freedom of speech, how connected is that? Is that also true in Poland, that there's almost an existential crisis that we can't even agree on what truth is?
Yeah, I think it's a crisis of the media also, because as you say, in Poland, it's the same. You have two realities, and you have medias who tell completely different stories. And you can see this very dangerous phenomena that the public television and the public radio, they really use super manipulation and lies. Just
to clarify, in Europe, public really means government run and government financed, correct?
Yeah.
Here our public stations are actually more neutral, even though they are partly funded by the government. So I just want, for American audiences, I just wanted to clarify that. Go ahead.
They're supposed to be neutral. You know, I mean, in France, you have public television, public radio, and they are neutral. Of course, there too, you can see some manipulation, etc., some tendencies to somehow influence the viewers. But here, it's really a propaganda, tool right now. Since 2015, the party that is in power, they are using it to manipulate in a way that is absolutely shocking. You have the feeling that there is no truth, objective truth. So like we have absolute records of death and disease of COVID right now, and the government is all the time giving a narrative of success and of being better than the other countries in Europe.
So sounds painfully familiar.
I think it's very close. When I read about America, it seems so the same, in this kind of contradiction that is violent, but also about what you said, the freedom of speech and of political views, We have this revolution in the streets, women fighting for their rights, for the right for abortion, because the brutality of the new law is terrible. It's getting away, like the basic rights of women, of reproductive rights. So there are thousands of women in the street, and it's a very strong revolution. And you have students and very young women in the streets. And now the Ministry of Education and some directors of school are putting, how do you say, kary, like they are, they can throw away a student that was in the street. Saying loud about her, her how do you say, for her not being, not agreeing with the government and the politics. So it's gone beyond some border of freedom. It's like, it's a censorship that can affect your life, your studies, your family life, and your work, because there are people also that are losing their works because of their political views.
You both grew up under a neoliberal presidency, is that correct? And then you saw this shift. Is that fair? Just for context. And I'm wondering, you are seeing a definite movement towards authoritarianism and the kind of aggressive or even brutal policies that you're describing in your lifetime in the last several years. How has that impacted the arts and the relevance of the arts to the society at large? And then we'll move on to your specific role.
I don't know. It's a very, very difficult question. I think that in general, the art is becoming more and more pessimistic, because that's the shift I experienced during my life, because I remember the moment when Poland started to be a member of European Union.
Yes.
And that was the time of a huge, huge optimism. And that's like our democracy will develop, that our society will become more and more the part of Europe, that we are not going to be forced to stay in Poland, to live in Poland, to study in Poland, but we can go abroad and we can be more the citizens of Europe than the citizens of Poland. And since the law and justice is ruling Poland, they have very strong anti-European Union orientation. So what they want to do is probably so-called Polexit, which means that they want to get Poland out of European Union. So it's like their politics is making us more and more alone, I would say, in the world, like without any important alliances with other countries. Yeah, it's like they have very, very strong nationalistic point of view, like, and very, very strong connections with Catholic Church, which right now is also in a very big crisis because of all the pedophiles issues, which we are having more and more information about right now. Like John Paul II was covering the pedophile scandal in a Catholic Church. Yeah, so in my opinion, it's like the connection between art and politics is that the world of politics is making us more and more pessimistic about the future.
The question for either of you, but perhaps particularly for Anna, are you finding that the shift in the politics has an effect on, despite the art becoming more pessimistic, as you put it, is it becoming more relevant and more urgent for audiences to engage in it as a window onto some kind of truth that's not an official truth, but maybe more of a, for lack of a better word, a spiritual truth? They say that art thrives in difficult times, and I suppose I'm fishing to find out if that's actually accurate, because you are really going through some very challenging times in Poland right now. And I'm wondering if audiences, particularly in the theater, are responding with more enthusiasm towards the arts, or are they, because the work is more skeptical, are they saying, thank you, there's enough skepticism in the world, we don't need that in our art as world, which is an argument we hear quite a bit on this, in this country.
You know, I must say that when I arrived 16 years ago in Poland, because I was raised in France, I already then had the feeling that theater and art in Poland has a huge weight in a social way, in the public discussion. It was much more interesting and relevant than in France. And the function of the artist in a society, the place of the artist here is much more how to say, meaningful. And I feel that artists are very active in a social way, political way, that they are much more conscious of their position and the world they live in. And
than in France.
Than in France. And
yes.
Of course, the past years have reinforced this. Yes, I'm absolutely convinced about it. And I suppose that even if, as Magda says, there is a pessimism and something very difficult to live with, and that is expressed in art, this is sure. I think the public needs it because it's a way to discuss about it, to grab the reality, and to look at it through the perspective of artists who somehow bring another gaze on it.
So you say that the audience is needed. By that you mean they're willing to embrace it, not
Just I wanted to finish that they bring another gaze than, for example, journalists or people who comment the reality in a more direct way. And art brings a space, as you say, of spirituality, certainly, but also I think a potential of analyze of social mechanism, of in another way showing the games of power. And this helps, I think, people to get together around those topics and to get out also of this really very heavy feeling of being all the time in a black and white reality. Because when you read the media as what journalists write, or just confront with the political context, everything seems really black and white and very like at war. Sometimes we really feel like at war, and now with the pandemic it's catastrophic. And then I think the arts, of course, they don't bring a naive optimism, but they gather people together in a deeper way. And this is, I think, like really something we need as water.
Thank you. I wanted to turn to your specific work, and if you can, each of you can describe how your work is connecting to the concerns that you feel for your society, your culture, and the world at large, which is a ridiculously huge question, but we can tie it specifically to the works you've been creating as directors. Just very interested in your approach, in your approaches, I should say.
The most important aspect of making theater for me is that it is creating a community. In the first step, I have to create a community between different artists, like performers, set designer, video artists, composer, and so on and so on. So it's our small community, which then opens for meeting with the audience. And the time of the performance is, for me, the moment when the real community exists for that 1 hour or two. And for that moment, it's not important, I don't know, which political option we are supporting. And the differences are not that important, because all of us are focusing on something that is happening on stage at that moment. And this can be very abstract, because what I do is not, I don't know, it doesn't have any traditional dramaturgy, for example. It's when I have to describe my work, I often say that it's more like a poem than a prose. It's like very metaphorical and not realistic, but more abstract. And when I produce a piece, I'm trying to make each scene to produce as to produce many possible meanings, not only one meaning, but I want everything to be that everything can be read, watched in many different ways. So it's also the thing that I need from the audience. So if you want to get something from my piece, you have to do your work with your own interpretation of what I want to show you. So for me, it's mostly the place of speculation, of looking at how the things are connected with one another. What are the points of connections? And not it's like my role is not in judging the things or judging the reality, but to show some possible interesting moments of reality on which I think it's worth to focus on. Yeah, so I really often have a feeling that theater is, for me, really a place of freedom and speculation and philosophical experiment with different ways of being, like how the things appear in the reality we are experiencing. Yeah, so
thank you.
That's my point of view.
It's very clear. Thank you. Anna.
Yeah, somehow I think about my work in theater as something that is based in sociology. I'm interested somehow in groups of people, and every performance tries to invite the audience into the world of a certain group and the problems of this group, the fights, the issues of this group. And it always comes to a point where I'm interested in the mechanisms of violence and power. So somehow, yes, I think it's full of political gestures, but it's very hidden political gestures. Like I'm trying somehow to touch the possibility of a change of narratives, because I think, and a lot of people express it in different dimensions, that we all need new languages to express this reality we're in and to understand it and to get free from certain words that make us think in a stereotypical way. So often what I try to do is to just get free from those stereotypes in the way we think about certain, certain issues between people in the society. So I'm very much interested somehow in the question of identity. I think this is something that is like the fundament of a lot of things I've been doing. But this question is very wide. It's not only a question of how one names itself or feel himself in the world. It's also how we find a place in a community, in a group of people, at work, for example, or in our relationship to other groups of people who can have power on us. So, for example, I've been doing a performance about school and the relationship between teachers, students, and parents. I've been doing a performance about medicine and progress, and it's an American story. It's the story of Henrietta Lacks that American people know better than we do in Europe, although it's a figure somehow that is incredibly meaningful, the story of Henrietta Lacks, for the story of progress and where we are right now, actually also in the context of pandemic, etc. And for example, this figure was a way to talk about the erasement of women in the history and the position of women and how they influence story, progress, political progress, etc., and how much they can be loud or not. So the question of visibility of certain experiences, but also of what the potential that someone that has other, let's say, position of as a citizen in the society can influence the building of the society. And I think this is something we've been observing very much also during the pandemic. So how politics that are more, let's say, directed by feminine values somehow open the possibility of building a society of care. And this idea of society of care in front of a society based on the culture of violence is something that interests me a lot, and that is very complicated, very not, not that black and white. So, for example, I did a performance also about, in the context of Me Too, somehow about violence at work and sexual harassment at work. We did this in Vilnius in the National Theatre, and for example, this was a performance who didn't show, just victims and oppressors, because somehow I think this is something pretty obvious and we don't need theater to show it. Also, I don't want to reproduce violence on scene. This is not something I am okay with. I am interested in violence as a topic, and I don't want to reproduce it on scene, on stage. I think there are a lot of artists in Poland, and Magda is one of their representative, and a lot of other female artists are putting this in the center, is the question of ethics at work. So how do you work is sometimes maybe more important than the topic that you raise. That, okay, you can talk about violence on stage, but if yourself, you are violent in the way you work with other people, somehow you're not really, you're not standing for the values you want to tell about as an artist.
And even worse, you may be even playing into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're actually, taking advantage of your position in a way, of your position of power also as a director. So this is something that interests me. And in this performance, what we put in the center was the question of the witnesses. So we, all of us in the audience, on stage, we are all somehow witnessing violence in our lives. And so who are we as people who witness it? What is our function towards violence? And are you capable to somehow see the mechanisms and then to just put a stop to them? So in a way, I think this is somehow a political way to put things together, although, as I said, it's not a direct expression of my political views. I mean, I think that they're undermining it, they're under it in a strong way, but I somehow make a difference between me as an artist saying things through art and me as a citizen going into the street or writing on Facebook things. And my activism, let's say, is something that I really put away from my art. And sometimes it's very tempting to just, you're living something very strongly in the streets, for example, as recently, and you want to put this energy and this rage also directly in your art.
Yes.
But somehow I try not to do it because I feel that maybe I can have something more interesting to say in another dimension than the direct one,
Understand.
But it's tricky. I think it's not easy to be an artist right now, to live such strong things as a citizen, as a woman, as a mother also, and then to be an artist.
Anna Smolar, Magda Szpecht, thank you so much for joining us from Warsaw, Poland. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Next week, Animal Farm is joined by playwright Neil Labute, and among other things, we'll be discussing what's going on in this country and what the American theater is supposed to do about it. And now, with thanks to Martha and Bo, please enjoy Humphrey the Bird and Ernie the Dog Pas de Deux.